Sharnic, thank you very much for agreeing to give a talk today. And I'll just do a quick introduction. Sharnic Djaker is from Blavatnik School and has been working on some really interesting projects. We came and had a chat with you, I think, about a year ago to talk about some of our work in developing countries, Global South. And today you're going to talk about scaling personalized learning and optimizing teacher engagement and implementation fidelity through A/B tests. So for people who are online, I'll be monitoring the chat. And after Sharnic is finished, we'll have a little bit of time for discussion as well. So again, thank you very much and welcome to the Quant Hub.
Thank you so much. And thank you once again for inviting me for this seminar. All right, so like Rob said, I work at the Blavatnik School of Government. I'm part of the What Works Hub for Global Education. It's a recently launched research consortium that is housed at the Blavatnik School. And today I'll be talking about one of the research that's ongoing at the hub, and that is about scaling a personalized learning program in India. And we specifically focus on optimizing teacher engagement and implementation fidelity as we scale the program up through A/B tests. So I want to highlight a little bit about how at the hub we approach A/B tests and use this case of the MindSpark, that's the program's name, scale up in India to sort of walk you through how we've been approaching, and I'll show you some preliminary results from what we have so far. All right. So what's the motivation? Like I said, this is one of the core research studies from the hub, and A/B testing is actually a core part of the What Works Hub's effort to advance new methods to support and study implementation, right? So rather than sort of focusing on questions of what works and whether a program works, the focus currently has been on how do we support implementation through rigorous sort of academic studies, and that is where we're sort of aiming to advance A/B testing as a method that can be used in social science settings, right? So I will take a moment to actually talk about how we're viewing A/B tests and how this has been sort of conceptualized in similar settings. But like I mentioned, so the idea is that rather than having programs evaluated once for its effectiveness, the idea is to have repeated trials for continuous improvements, and that really plays a huge role when we're taking programs that we know works to scale. Right, so we at the hub we work with a lot of implementers to advance adaptive testing in the social sector. So as you may be familiar with the term A/B testing, it actually is sort of more common in the tech sector, where there are lots of A/B tests that we are all subjects of at all times. YouTube's testing, YouTube's running A/B tests all the time with different thumbnails, with different icons. Where the like button's placed and so on and so forth. There are lots of A/B tests that we are all subject to in the tech world, and all of that sort of happens passively in the back end. However, it is quite rare that in social science settings people are looking at sort of repeated trials in a way that can be meaningful. So the idea is to sort of work with implementers, identify questions that are that can be conducive to this adaptive testing. So you'll see some of those examples as well today. And specifically in this study, our goal is to tackle this core implementation question of one of our partners, educational initiatives, who are based out of India, using high frequency data that they have on engagement and learning. As I promised, let me take a moment to talk about adaptive testing. The idea is to, and this is sort of a general take on A/B testing, not specifically about the program itself, which I'll jump into in a second. But with adaptive testing, the goal is to fine-tune and optimize existing programs to determine what works best. It yields causal results because it works on the principle of randomization. So you have results that are similar to what you have in RCT, where you have a strong causal attribution. It is rapid and iterative in the sense that the interventions are often tested in short cycles, and you learn and improve upon for the next cycle. and lots of adaptive adjustments are made. So the goal is always to not have a very rigid plan when you go in. We look at one cycle or one A/B test at a time, so as to allow for ongoing optimization of both the intervention that you're testing, but as well as to sort of adapt to the implementation of the scale-up program sort of during expansion. And the research questions often come directly from those who are involved in the implementation, right? So, and this is sort of quite obvious to see, because when you go in there, you're essentially going in with an open question of how do you make sure that this program can be scaled up effectively, and no one better than the implementers know what's best way to scale the programs up. So we often we sort of have a broader agenda of how to what kind of strategies to focus on. However, the specific questions that are being tested in each of these A/B testing cycles are always led by the practitioners or the implementers. And finally, this is given the design of A/B tests, it being quite adaptive and rapid, and the fact that we try to use sort of data that is, again, by design, because if you want a test to be adaptive and rapid, you can't quite go and collect data. You won't have the luxury of time. And I think right before the seminar started, I heard someone say life is too short to collect your own data. So yes, it often ends up being cost effective than RCTs or other sort of impact evaluation methods, because you're relying on data that is within the system. And yes, there are pros and cons. Not every program sort of allows for using the data from there. So, in a lot of the partnerships that we have at the hub, we actually spend a considerable amount of time setting up the data flow systems in a way that it can then be useful for running A/B tests. So rather than sort of looking at how best to sort of collect data in the field, we look at what are the existing systems, how can we leverage it better to actually have data flowing in that will allow us to do these multiple tests at a time. So these are the general principles of how we are approaching A/B tests in the social science sector. And how are they different from RCTs? It's quite obvious, but it's nice to have this comparison. The idea is essentially that in RCTs, you're often working with a pure control group because you're interested in evaluating the effectiveness of a or a package of programs. However, in A/B tests, we're looking at multiple versions at all times, right? So you're looking at questions that are contrasting, two different variants that the implementer or the practitioner is actually or wanting to make a decision on. So you're contrasting between multiple versions. In an education setting, the typical time frame for RCTs in the developing country, in the global south, is often an academic year. However, in A/B tests, we are able to do at least 2 to 3 tests over a year. Again, similarly, the cadence of an RCT is often one time. You have one question, you go in, and it's sort of you have a package of questions. You might have some mechanism-oriented questions, but often it's sort of one question that you're asking from this research. And over here, you have new questions come up after actually seeing the results from the previous round. So there are multiple questions that you are testing sequentially. And this is a point that I mentioned earlier about measurement, where rather than relying on external surveys that RCTs often tend to do, in A/B tests, the goal is to actually invest quite a bit to create at least monitoring and evaluation systems that allow you to use the data that is flowing in from the within. Just to give you a very quick example of a series of A/B tests that was run by one of our partners. This is a targeted instruction program that delivers phone-based instruction to youths, to school students, secondary school students in Botswana. Our partner organization is Youth Impact, so they delivered this, and here they essentially summarizing the results from 4 rounds of A/B tests. In the first round, so again, this is a phone-based delivery of a targeted instruction program. So in the first round, the 2 contrasts that were tested was whether the delivery of instruction should happen via SMS or via phone calls. SMS was sort of an obvious starting point for the government to test because it's quite cost effective. It's very cheap to send SMS material, have instruction material sent over SMS, but we don't know what the effectiveness is and how that will compare with having the same material sent via phone calls. so what they find was, this is from about an 8-week exposure to the program. They find phone calls to be more effective. Now, they continue to test in the second round. Yes, phone calls are effective, but what if we, double the dosage of weekly SMS, right? Because SMS is still a very cost-effective way of getting the information sent. So they, in the second round, Youth Impact tested these two variants where they have twice the amount of weekly SMSs that were sent to the parents, and contrasted that with phone calls. They found that the phone calls still continued to work. Again, the outcome that they're looking at is learning outcomes. So when I say it, when the program continues to work, that means there's a statistically significant improvement in learning outcomes at the end of the program. In the third round, then the question was, by at this point, you're about half academic year into the program, and you have clarity that phone calls are working well and in comparison to SMSs. Now the question is, how should we plan phone calls, right? Should they do one weekly phone call with 20 minutes, or two or a 40-minute bi-weekly phone call, right? So rather than having a phone call sent to the parents that is of a 20-minute length every week, what if you plan for a 40-minute phone call once in 2 weeks, right? So what they see is that actually the learning gains are not statistically significant from each other. However, the cost of the program is quite different because of the fixed cost of scheduling, finding sort of the right time to have this phone-based instruction delivered to parents. The costs are quite different in terms of the manpower it takes to deliver the intervention. So what they see is that even when the learning gains are equal, one variant of the program where you have 40-minute biweekly call is much more cost effective. So that was what they took forward to the fourth round, where you now have a 40-minute biweekly phone call as the way, or as sort of the setup for the instruction to be delivered. Now they wanted to add, because the question for the implementers was, you have a caregiver who's assisting the child on the other end of the phone. Do we want them to sort of participate in the lessons or not? So that was a question that they had, and this was again tested in a sequential A/B testing pattern, where they in one of the variants, the caregiver's interaction during the phone-based instruction was unstructured, and in the second variant, the caregiver was actually explicitly asked to take over after a certain point. And what they find eventually is the impact of the program with caregiver taking over in this sort of certain pathway is twice as effective as what they originally started, right? So you can see when you have this iterative learning opportunity in a setup of this sort, you're able to first discover new questions that implementers are able to ask, but also sort of adapt our priors on what we think might work, right? So if you think about a counterfactual in an RCT world, one might have to, a researcher or the implementer might have to come up with a package of or a package of decisions that involve how the program would be implemented. And that would be compared against a pure control group, and you sometimes get a positive result. You have a statistically significant, standard deviation gains in learning outcomes, or more oftentimes than not, you actually don't have a very clear result, and you're unable to unpack what just happened, right? So you might not have as much learning as what you have currently here, where you're sort of sequentially building the questions up to see what can actually help in a scale-up process. So yeah, this is a quick example of how sort of a package of A/B tests work. And I often start with this because this is a completed program, and this is currently being scaled up in multiple countries actually at the moment. And again, there are lots of ongoing A/B tests in all of those scale-up initiatives, but it sort of gives us a picture of the advantages that A/B tests lend themselves to quite well in comparison to sort of traditional ways of evaluating programs. But this is not the program here I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to introduce you to this program called MindSpark, that which is a flagship program which is a flagship product of one of our partners called Educational Initiatives. Now, MindSpark is a computer-aided learning platform where there is adaptive learning that happens based on how children answer questions that are sort of given, right? So there is a question that pops up, a child responds, and then based on which option they choose, they're then directed to the next question, and sort of that's sort of the general flow of how MindSpark works. It's a computer-aided adaptive learning platform. It has one of the largest item banks in digital learning in the global south. It has over 45,000 questions at the primary level that the algorithm uses to adapt based on. And it creates an individualized learning path, and essentially sort of resembles the idea of teaching at the right level or personalized learning setups, right? So at scale, what they're essentially doing is sort of having a very individualized learning path through the algorithm that sort of feeds children or redirects children to different questions, to easier questions when they get something wrong, or easier sort of concepts to first master before they get shown advanced questions or concepts or lessons. The variable cost of implementing MindSpark at scale is really low, which is what sort of garnered lots of attention for the program. So it is as low as about $20 per child per year. And you'll see where this leads to. Having such low a marginal cost of adding another child leads to, when sort of from a government and a policy making perspective. Now, because this is a computer-based program, there is high-frequency data on engagement and learning that is available for the program implementers, and we actually leverage quite a bit of that to answer the questions that they have. So this is a very quick snapshot of how the MindSpark program works. It is translated in the local language. This is Hindi that you're seeing here, but the idea is essentially there are a sequence of series of questions that come in after a brief instruction, and then there is sort of a learning path that gets created based on how children answer the questions that are shown at the end of each of those lessons. So it's quite sort of straightforward in that sense. But again, where the MindSpark ends up being quite superior to some of the other programs that are available at scale is this large amount of data bank that they're currently working with. So with that, so here is the pathway to scale that MindSpark or educational initiatives experience with this program, right? So in 2009, it was a very small proof of concept study that was conducted in one of the Indian states. It was again they secured a small scale private funding to run a pilot study with less than 50 students to test whether this idea of sort of item-based adaptive learning setup can work. And that led to a private funding to increase the users in government schools. So from about 50 students in 2011, they were able to scale this up to 2,000 students in another Indian state. Until then, this was a proof of concept sort of study that was done earlier. It was not a rigorous evaluation in any sense. The first evaluation of the model happened in 2016 by JPAL South Asia. It was an RCT of the program, and it showed conclusive gains of over 0.2 to or between 0.2 to 0.3 standard deviations in math and reading, and this was published in the American Economic Review. And from then on, the program sort of, there was a lot of light shown onto the program, because again, this was the study for the first time. This was a rigorous study that showed that this program can be quite effective at scale, and quite possible to be sort of implemented by government school systems, right? So you don't need a flashy, you don't need an iPad to run this program. This can be an offline module that is loaded onto a really low cost Android system, and actually, they now have a version that runs on browser as well. They pride themselves as one of the programs that used to run really well on Internet Explorer. They don't even need anything beyond that. But now that Internet Explorer is killed, they run on whichever browser that you have. So it is a very sort of a lightweight program. Right after the study, In 2017, Education Initiatives secured a 2.3 million grant from Global Innovation Fund, with a goal to reach 6,500 students in 40 schools. And this was run in partnership with a couple other states in the northern region of India, in Gujarat and Rajasthan. 4 years later, again, they secured a 1.5 million USAID funding to scale this up to 40,000 students, 40,000 students in 200 schools across India. In 2024, as of now, MindSpark is being used over 500,000 students in India, with both institutional and private funding, and in partnership with lots of state governments. So this is quite a salient program to be studied. Um, in the setting, and just to sort of highlight the gains that were found in the 2016 study. This is so the paper was called Disrupting Education, Experimental Evidence on Technology-Aided Instruction in India. It was, the original authors are now part of the WhatWorks Hub, Karthik Muralidharan, Abhijit Singh, and Ale Ganimi, and these are economists who and they published this in the American Economic Review. And what they showed is that having exposure to the program increased the math scores by 0.37 standard deviation, and the language scores by 0.23 standard deviation, when the length of exposure was just 4.5 months, right? So in a 4.5 month exposure, the gains in learning were quite substantial. And when they looked at the treatment, and what they show is that the treatment on the treated estimates are actually as high as 0.6 standard deviation for math, and 0.39 standard deviation for language when there was a full treatment, right? So when a student had a full attendance of 90 days, the effectiveness of the program was as high as 0.6 standard deviation, which is quite substantial, as you'd know. However, where are we now, right? So this is everything that I just showed, that I told you as the effectiveness of the program that was found in the RCT is in this column, right? Is in this column blue. The dosage was 6 days a week. It was used for 90 minutes per day, and the learning gains were 0.2 to 0.3 standard deviation. It was implemented in MindSpark centers, and it was implemented as an after-school program, right? However, when the program started getting scaled up, so you sort of saw the journey that I just showed you a couple slides ago, right? So this is the setup that we spoke about here. But ever since 2017, the program's picking up quite a bit. Lots of state governments are investing taxpayer dollars into buying this program for government schools. And that is the state at which we are at, right? The planned implementation at scale in the USAID program, right? So this is with a target of reaching 40,000 students in 200 schools, is that the program would be made available for at least 2 days a week for students with at least 60 minutes of usage per week. And this would be implemented in schools during school hours, right? Because so the moment you go away from a controlled RCT setting, the plan for scale is this setup, right? So this was sort of what the expectation was in terms of usage and exposure that the organization had when the program was taken to scale. However, when the partnership with the WhatWorks Hub started and we started working with them, what we observed was that the actual dosage that students got was 0.8 days a week on average, and what they translated to was a usage of 20 minutes per week, right? So the expectation was that the students would engage with this software for about 60 minutes. However, in reality, it was 20 minutes that the students were using in. There is no data on what the learning gains are, because this hasn't been evaluated at scale. This is still implemented in a school location, so during school hours. So our focus with the A/B testing partnership with this organization is to figure this out, right? There is something that is breaking down here, because all of the decisions are made based on what was found in the RCT, And based on that, in sort of a scale model, there is a set expectation. But what we actually see in the field, and this is something that the organization acknowledges as well, is that with whatever sort of implementation sort of breakdowns, what you have is a much smaller exposure to the program. So obviously, you can imagine what the drop in learning gains would be. If the students are using it only for 20 minutes a week, right? So that is the state at which we are at. And so that brings us to the research agenda for, in between the, so this is the goal that this partnership has between EI Mindspark and the What Works Up, right? So the idea is Mindspark largely relies on teachers in schools to ensure that the program is delivered. And there is a little bit of support that is available from the EI staff. So EI is the Education Initiative, sorry. There is a little bit of support that is available, but that is obviously increasingly difficult and expensive to actually have the program staff being sent to 200 plus schools to tightly implement the program. So that sort of highlights a disconnect between teachers and the program delivery expectations, right? So then that leads to the question of how do we improve teachers' buy-in for the Mindspark software in school? And we wanted to rely on the high frequency data on both engagement and learning that is available from Mindspark. The key indicators that we relied on was one, at the intensive margin, it was the usage that we can track at a student level. On the extensive margin, what the activity is, right? So you have whether whether all students or what percentage of students from within the class are actually participating in the Mindspark program at all, because all of this is quite tracked. And eventually, I mean, all of us are interested in the eventual learning outcomes. So that is also something that we are using as one of the key indicators here. I just want to, throughout the presentation, I also wanted to take this opportunity to highlight what some of the A/B testing features are that sort of pops up quite a bit, right? So first is, you see that this is, and the question that we've taken up is designed to answer immediate implementer question. This is not a research study to test whether Mindspark at scale is effective or not. I think that is sort of that is down the line. For now, the implementer has a question of how can we improve the teachers' buy-in for the software that when it's available for free in schools. We're also using high frequency data rather than collecting new data. Yeah. So that's where we are. This is the sample. This is the map of India. The two states where this is being implemented are highlighted here. That's Himachal Pradesh and Punjab. 20,000 students in about 170 schools is where we started with, and the program is expanding. In parallel to the A/B test. So when we started with, we had about 170 schools for the first round of A/B tests. Here's a quick summary of where we are for the Mindspark A/B test program. So we started in August of 2023. So August to September, 8 weeks. We contrasted two arms, and I will get into the details of what exactly we had as components of each of these rounds. But this is a quick summary, right? So we started with contrasting the status quo with with delivering teachers a usage report card with a goal to sort of make this disconnect salient to teachers, right? We wanted to highlight to teachers what the current usage looks like through a report card. We found that the report cards are effective. Then in the second round, we looked at how do we make it even more effective, right? So we then contrasted having usage report cards and comparing it with another arm where you have report cards and a phone call that sort of explicitly has a call to action element embedded to it. We find that it does not have having this call to action did not yield any additional gains. And again, here all we're looking at is the student outcome as a student usage as the outcome indicator. We're not looking at learning outcomes yet. I'll give you the context for that as we progress forward, but this is what we had in the second round. In the third round, we had some good learning from the implementation data that we collected in the second round. So based on that, the decision was to look at was to continue looking at usage report cards and contrast that with having a call to action that is delivered by an internal team member, and that is the test that is ongoing. I mean, the test concluded. We are now looking at the results right now, but the test ended actually in the first week of January. So that is where we are. This is 3 rounds of A/B tests so far, and this is to show that like this is not the end goal here in this partnership. Based on the results that we have, there'll be a 4th A/B round and the 5th A/B round and so on and so forth, right? Because we are essentially relying on data that is coming in from the system. So the marginal cost of continuing sort of these iterative questions are not very high, and this is something that we're hoping to sort of develop through this partnership here. All right, so let's jump into A/B test 1. What exactly did we do? So we started with about 170 schools, and we did a school level randomization where in arm A, we had 84 schools, 9,000 students. It was a status quo, right? We did not change anything. The MindSpark program was implemented as it was intended to in the policy plans, right? Whatever the government officials instructed the school teachers to implement, that ran on as it was intended. In the second arm, teachers who were responsible for implementing the program were given a report card that had details on students' usage of the program. So we had 86 schools and about 10,000 students there. The weekly physical cards were delivered to the teachers with an information on the lowest and highest uses and the relative ranking of the school in terms of usage compared to other schools within the district. I think I did have a screenshot of how the report card looked like. Yeah, I have it here. But what did we find in the first round? We found significant effects on usage in the later weeks. So this is a quick summary of the result, and I'll just show you what exactly we have. So the gain that we found on average was about 5 minutes of additional usage per week, which might not sound like a lot, right? But you should, I just want to remind you that the baseline we started was with 20 minutes. So this is a 25% improvement over the baseline that we had. So although the recommended level is still 60 minutes, we are nowhere near that. But from about 20 minutes, just having teachers having access to or the usage statistics increased students' usage by about five additional minutes. And in this graph, you can see how sort of, this was the 8-week long program. You have treatment usage statistics in orange and the control group in green. And you see how across weeks, the cumulative usage in minutes starts improving as you go further and further. So in the later weeks, you see a statistically significant improvement, which then gives you an average of about 5 minutes over the business as usual group. The key takeaways was that report cards seem to work. We did recommend that you should consider an adaptation that improves the effectiveness of these report cards. But the larger point was that randomizing at a school level might not be ideal because you only have about 170 schools. So 80 schools is not going to give you much of a statistical power to be able to detect smaller differences that might have existed. So the recommendation was to see whether a randomization at a more granular level was possible to improve power. And to also consider more consequential changes that can be detected with these small samples, right? So yeah, this is how the report card looked like. It was obviously translated in the local language, but it had all of these different statistics of who's using it, who's not using it, who are the or like how does this school's usage compare to other schools in the districts and so on. Sorry, yeah. Again, just wanted to highlight that having a randomization at a more granular level obviously always helps because you have a much higher statistical precision through this. Now, in the second round, so we now have a result that report cards might be working. We wanted to add a layer of calling. So over here, we are now at a teacher level randomization scenario. So you have 400 teachers with teacher level randomization, and the report card delivery was sort of adapted as it was from A/B test 1 into the A/B test 2. And the second arm in A/B test 2 had a phone-based call to action, where there was a weekly phone call made to the teachers that sort of discussed the components of the report card, and also made sure that teachers have an opportunity to ask any questions that they have about implementing this software, or like, making this software more accessible to teachers. However, the organization had contracted external call center agents to do this. So that was sort of what the setup was. You had 50% of the teachers, about 200 teachers, receiving an additional call from a call center for a set of call center agents who were trained to deliver this information and sort of contextualize that information that is available in the report cards via a phone call. And the idea was to encourage careful reading of the report card and also act as a commitment mechanism to take remedial action that they have based on the, that they have in the report card. What did we find? Insignificant difference in engagement after 8 weeks. Absolutely nothing, nothing changed. Whatever effects were found on the report card continued to sustain, right? So we are still at a state where the average usage is about 25 minutes instead of 20 minutes. However, there is no sort of marginal difference that we're seeing in arm B over arm A. What did we then do? We dug a little deeper. We had more sort of granular data on implementation. And what you see is that the dosage of phone call that the teachers received was really low, right? So only 54% of the teachers were reached in week 1. So in the 200 teachers, only about 100 teachers were actually reached via the phone calls, and only 20% of the teachers were reached. This actually starts declining quite steadily, where only 20% of the teachers were reached via phone in week 4, right? So, sorry, this should be round 4. So over an 8-week period, the phone calls went once in 2 weeks. So this is round 4, week 8. And there's also very low consistency. What we have from the implementation data is that only 8 teachers actually out of the 200 who were targeted were engaged on all 4 phone calls, right? So this is a really low dosage of the marginal ad that we see in the data. And again, just for sort of from a definition perspective, we looked at any phone call between the call center agent and the teacher lasting over 120 seconds as a successful phone call. So with that metric, what you see is a really low implementation scenario here. We discussed with our implementing partners. We try to understand what might be the reason that is that can explain this really low usage. And what came out was that this might be because the phone calls are coming from someone the teachers don't know, right? They're not associating this third-party call center agent as EI people. So the recommendation that actually came from the practitioners was that what if we use our internal resources to make this phone call? So what if we originate the phone calls from EI school officers, the ones that I mentioned earlier, who are sort of the support people on the ground, who are already in regular touch with the teachers, and so what if we make that as the source of the phone calls that are going, right? So we then moved to A/B test 3, where we continue to do the same thing, where you're contrasting a usage report card without any call to action to a phone call with call to action coming from an internal team member that teachers can recognize, and they have a face to this voice in the scenario. So that is where we are. And again, like I said, the program is continuing to be scaled up. So you now have access to 718 teachers. And this was done at the randomization was done at a teacher level. You have about 350 teachers in each of the arms. And now teachers are receiving phone calls from someone they know, from the EI school-based officer. And this also had sort of a knock-on effect, which is that these school officers were originally scheduled to make school visits. So their job description involved visiting all of the schools that they were that they were mapped to make sure that they were able to support implementation. Now we're diverting some of their time and energy that goes into school visits to making phone calls. So that obviously reduces cost for the organization. So they were thrilled about trying this out. So, yeah, this is what I was talking about, which is the personal costs were quite high, and it was actually increasingly outpaced the software cost during scale up, where the AI school officers or the implementation support staff were currently mapped to 3 schools, and that leads to a really high dependence on the field staff, during deployment at scale. And however, what the organization thinks is sustainable is if they can maintain a ratio of one field officer to 30 schools. Obviously, they won't be able to reach all of the 30 schools. So now they're, what we're testing is essentially a way to expand the capacity of the organization to support, and that expansion comes from having these officers make phone calls rather than physical visits. Another goal that we have from round 3 of the test is that we, in addition to looking at engagement via usage, we also wanted to start looking at learning outcomes. It wasn't quite obvious because the software doesn't have a standardized test package embedded within it that allows us to test whether there are learning gains. Although it does have like thousands of items that students are attempting constantly, but each item that the student gets is quite different, right? So because it's quite individualized, it's hard to find a sort of a standard package of items that are being exposed to all the students that allows us to sort of rigorously say whether there are learning gains. But that is an aspect that we're working with, right? It took us sort of the relationship building over the last 2 rounds of A/B tests to get to a point where we're now working with the software team to actually have same set of questions being sent to the sample of students who we are interested in, that allows us to measure learning quite accurately. And that is one of the things that we are aiming to look at as an additional outcome measure in round 3. So quick summary of the results. We see the report card format helps, but it can be improved upon. There's lots of scope. The focus on reducing the marginal cost is quite high priority for the implementer at scale. So they're really thrilled about phone calls, but they want to figure out how to make this work. And they're also sort of they're seeing this as an alternative way to strengthen the touch point between the implementing organization and the teachers. However, we're not there yet, and it might take 3 more A/B tests to actually come at a point where we see this relationship being much more stronger. Yes, again, focus on learning is high priority now, because we want to start focusing on what this actually means, right? Whether this usage is converting into learning in the first place or not. And our guiding principles for the future A/B tests are essentially what are the what are strategies that the organization can consider to reduce cost while during scale up, and how can you have sort of those strategies also impact student learning outcomes. Some A/B testing process takeaways to sort of bring the circle to sort of to bring about a full circle is high frequency monitoring data can be quite useful and can be leveraged for iterative testing and adaptation. It so far has been, yes, we had some challenges as to making sure that we're getting the right data, and the data that the organization was collecting internally was useful. So it took us some time to get to that point. But once you get there, it's actually quite fruitful to have the zero cost data flowing in quite well for you to have these sequential experiments being planned. Now, we are asking middle level question. None of these questions are big enough to actually, this is not, these are not like groundbreaking questions that you're asking, but you're asking series of middle level minor questions that then can accumulate and sort of show something that is meaningful. Randomization at a granular level has been quite important for us, especially starting from comparing what we had in the first round to what we have currently, we are able to detect much more smaller changes, if it exists, because we were able to get the implementers to randomize this or implement this at a teacher level rather than a school level. So it is a bit of an ask, because obviously having a school level implementation was what they prefer, because it's quite simple to track implementation. But these are sort of some of the trade-offs and or process takeaways that come in, that sort of allows us to have more conclusive results that can better inform the decisions that they're making. And yeah, one of the things that came out really positively from A/B test round 2 was having access to that implementation data, and because that sort of adds nuance to the result that we found, right? So null results can often be conflated with poor intervention when it's actually poor implementation. So that is something that we quite clearly saw from round 2. So we are continuing to actually expand the set of implementation measures that we can collect in this setup. But all of this is sort of quite handcrafted for the program, based on the needs, based on the existing monitoring and evaluation systems. But sort of these are general process takeaways that can be applicable for other partnerships as well. Let me end with acknowledging all of our partners, right? So this is some of the other partners of the WhatWorks Hub, where we currently have A/B testing going on. So it's EI MindSpark, Rocket Learning, and other. Some of them are actually technology-based programs. This is a question that often comes up, and I want to stop and have some time for discussion as well. But if you're already thinking about it, yes, it is more. It's slightly easy to get A/B testing done in tech-based programs, but we are working with partners who are completely sort of out of the tech world as well, with whom we are able to do some A/B testing. In fact, our partnership with Pratham actually involves testing different variants of the Teaching at the Right Level program when it's actually run in partnership with government, right? It's as sort of clunky a machine as you can imagine, but yes, there are opportunities for us to that we're already seeing for us to sort of implement an A/B testing program and maybe implement an A/B testing study. All right, let me stop here.
Thank you very much.